Eleanor Wade's boots sank into the muddy earth of Willow Creek, Tennessee, as the autumn wind carried the scent of pine and damp leaves. At 32, she was no stranger to hardship, but the promise of a new beginning had fueled her long journey from Boston. Her dark hair, streaked with early silver, was tucked beneath a bonnet, and her plain wool dress did little to flatter her sturdy frame. She wasn't beautiful by society's standards, her jaw too strong, her hands too calloused, but her hazel eyes burned with a quiet fire. She'd come to marry Thomas Reed, a man she'd known only through letters, his words warm and steady, promising a life together on a small farm. A marriage by correspondence wasn't the dream of her girlhood, but it was a chance to belong to, build something lasting. Yet as she stood in the town square, a boy no older than 12 thrust a folded paper into her hand. "From Mr. Reed," he muttered before scampering off. The letter was curt, its ink smudged. "Miss Wade, I regret to inform you I cannot honor our agreement. I've chosen another. You're not what I expected. T. Reed." Eleanor's breath caught the words slicing deeper than any blade. Not what he expected. She'd sent no portrait, only honest descriptions of her character and skills. Had he expected a delicate beauty instead of a woman shaped by years of toil? Her fingers trembled as she folded the letter, tucking it into her pocket like a wound she couldn't yet face. Willow Creek buzzed around her, merchants, haggling children darting through the square, and women casting curious glances her way. She was a stranger here, a spinster rejected, before she'd even had a chance to prove herself. The weight of their stares pressed against her, but Eleanor squared her shoulders. She hadn't survived her father's debts, her mother's death, and a decade of labor to crumble now. At the edge of the square, a weathered sign read, "Doña Rufina's Boarding House." It was her only option until she could plan her next move. As she crossed the street, a man leaned against a nearby fence, his broad frame silhouetted against the setting sun. His hat was low, but his eyes, sharp and kind, met hers for a fleeting moment. He nodded as if acknowledging her presence, before turning back to his work unloading sacks of grain. Inside the boarding house, Doña Rufina, a stout woman with silver-streaked braids and a warm smile, welcomed her. "You look like you've carried the world on your shoulders, child," she said, her voice rich with a Spanish lilt. "Stay here and we'll sort it out." Eleanor managed a faint smile, but her heart churned. What now? Return to Boston, where she'd be a burden to her married sister, or stay in this strange town where whispers of her rejection would surely spread? As she unpacked her few belongings, the letter's words echoed. "You're not what I expected." But Eleanor Wade was not one to be defined by another's expectations. Eleanor woke to the scent of fresh cornbread and the distant clatter of pans in Doña Rufina's kitchen. Her room at the boarding house was small but tidy, with a quilted bedspread and a window overlooking the rolling hills beyond Willow Creek. The view was breathtaking: golden fields framed by dense pine forests, the Smoky Mountains looming like silent sentinels. Yet as she traced the letter's creases in her pocket, the beauty felt like a taunt. What place did a rejected woman have in a town that didn't know her? Downstairs, Doña Rufina pressed a steaming mug of chicory coffee into her hands. "You've got a fire in you, Eleanor Wade," she said, her dark eyes gleaming. "Don't let one fool's words snuff it out." Eleanor nodded, but the weight of Thomas Reed's rejection clung to her. She'd poured her hopes into his letters, imagining a partnership built on mutual respect. Instead, she was a stranger in a town where whispers spread faster than wildfire. As she sipped the bitter coffee, she resolved to stay at least long enough to prove she wasn't broken. That morning, she ventured into Willow Creek to assess her options. The town was small but vibrant, with a general store, a blacksmith's forge, and a whitewashed church at its heart. The air carried the tang of wood smoke and the rhythmic clang of a hammer. Eleanor's practical mind cataloged possibilities: she could sew, cook, or teach, but her skills were modest and her savings were thin. She needed work, and soon. At the general store, she inquired about employment, but the owner, a wiry man named Mr. Hargrove, shook his head. "Folks here don't take kindly to strangers. Taking jobs," he said, not unkindly, "and well, words out about Mr. Reed makes things complicated." Eleanor's cheeks burned, so the town already knew. She thanked him and stepped outside, her resolve hardening. She wouldn't beg for pity. As she walked, she noticed the man from the previous day, the one with the kind eyes, repairing a fence near the livery stable. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong forearms dusted with sawdust. He glanced up and their eyes met again, longer this time. "You're the new arrival," he said, his voice low and steady, like the rumble of a distant river. "Name's Caleb Holt. Eleanor Wade." She replied, her tone cautious but polite. He tipped his hat, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Heard you've had a rough start. Willow Creek's not always kind to newcomers, but it's got good bones. Stick around and you'll find your place." His words were simple, but they carried a sincerity that caught her off guard. She studied him, tall, with weathered hands and a face that spoke of hard work and harder losses. He wasn't handsome in the polished way of city men, but there was a quiet strength in him, like the oak trees lining the town's edge. Before she could respond, a woman's voice cut through the air. "Caleb Holt, you're wasting daylight." A striking woman with auburn hair and a tailored dress approached, her smile sharp as a blade. "And who's this Miss Wade?" "Meet Clara Beaumont," Caleb said, his tone neutral. "Clara runs the town's sewing circle." Clara's eyes raked over Eleanor, lingering on her plain dress and sturdy boots. "The mail-order bride, I presume," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Such a pity about Mr. Reed. Though I can't say I'm surprised." Eleanor's spine stiffened. "I'm no one's pity, Miss Beaumont, and I'm here to stay." Clara's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly, looping her arm through Caleb's. "Well, we'll see. Come, Caleb, you promised to help with the church repairs." As they walked away, Caleb glanced back, his expression unreadable, but not unkind. Eleanor's heart thudded, not with anger, but with a spark of something new. Defiance, perhaps, or the faint possibility of belonging. She turned toward the boarding house, her mind racing. Clara's barb had stung, but Caleb's quiet encouragement lingered. Could she carve out a place here, despite the whispers, or would Willow Creek's prejudices prove too steep a hill to climb? Eleanor's days in Willow Creek settled into a rhythm of survival, each one a quiet battle against the town's sidelong glances and her own doubts. The boarding house became her sanctuary, where Doña Rufina's hearty stews and blunt wisdom offered solace. "You don't need their approval," Niña Rufina said one evening, stirring a pot of chili. "You need a purpose." Purpose. The word lodged in Eleanor's chest like a seed. She'd always been practical, mending clothes, balancing ledgers, keeping her family afloat after her father's ruin. But purpose was more than survival. It was leaving a mark. She spent her mornings scaring Willow Creek for work, her afternoons helping Rufina with chores, and her nights wrestling with the question of what she could offer this town. One crisp morning, as the scent of frost and wood smoke hung in the air, Eleanor noticed a crowd near the church. The building's roof had caved in after a storm, and the townsfolk were debating repairs. "Too costly, Mr. Hargrove grumbled. "We'll have to make do with the schoolhouse for services." Eleanor's mind sparked. In Boston, she'd helped organize a barn raising after a fire. Could she rally Willow Creek for a similar effort? The idea felt daunting. She was an outsider, and a rejected one at that, but the church was the town's heart. Fixing it could be her way in. She approached the group, her heart pounding. "I've seen communities rebuild together," she said, her voice steady despite the stares. "If we pool resources and labor, we could have the church ready by Christmas." Clara Beaumont, standing nearby with her arms crossed, let out a delicate laugh. "You think you can just waltz in and lead us? You don't even belong here, Miss Wade." The words stung, but Eleanor held her ground. "I'm offering to help. If you don't want it, I'll step back." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Then Caleb Holt stepped forward, wiping sawdust from his hands. "She's got a point," he said, his voice calm but firm. "The church matters to all of us. I'll lend my hammer if Miss Wade's willing to organize." His support was a lifeline, and Eleanor seized it. "I'll make a plan. Materials, workers, timelines. Who's with us?" To her surprise, a few hands rose. Older men, a young couple, even the blacksmith's apprentice. Clara's lips pursed, but she said nothing, her eyes narrowing as she slipped away. Over the next week, Eleanor threw herself into the project. She sketched plans by candlelight, calculated lumber needs, and persuaded Mr. Hargrove to donate nails at cost. Caleb was a constant presence, hauling timber and offering quiet suggestions. She learned he was a widower, his wife lost to fever 3 years prior, and his steady demeanor hid a grief that mirrored her own. One evening, as they sorted planks under a sky streaked with pink, Caleb spoke. "You're not what I expected, Miss Wade." Her heart sank, the echo of Thomas Reed's letter ringing in her ears. "And what did you expect?" she asked, bracing herself. "Someone who'd run after what happened," he said, meeting her gaze. "But you're building something here. That takes guts." His words warmed her, but doubt lingered. Could she trust this quiet man's kindness? Or was it pity? And what of Clara, whose sharp smiles seemed to follow her everywhere? The church project was a start, but Eleanor knew it would take more than nails and timber to prove her worth to the town and to herself. As she walked back to the boarding house, the stars glittered above the Smoky Mountains, their light a reminder of possibilities. She wasn't just rebuilding a church, she was rebuilding her place in the world. But could she withstand the whispers and Clara's subtle barbs, or would her fledgling roots be torn from this rocky soil? The churchyard buzzed with activity as Eleanor's plan took shape. The air was thick with the scent of fresh-cut pine and the rhythmic thud of hammers. Men hauled timber, while women organized meals for the workers, their chatter mingling with the rustle of autumn leaves. Eleanor stood at the center, her worn notebook filled with lists and sketches, directing the chaos with a quiet authority she hadn't known she possessed. Each morning she arrived before dawn, her breath visible in the chilly air to mark progress and assign tasks. The townsfolk were warming to her slowly. The blacksmith's apprentice, a gangly boy named Jonah, grinned when she praised his work. Mrs. Hargrove, the storekeeper's wife, brought her a shawl one cold morning, muttering, "You're doing right by us." But not everyone was swayed. Clara Beaumont lingered on the edges, her auburn curls catching the sunlight as she whispered to her sewing circle, their glances sharp as thorns. Caleb was a steady presence, his hands deft with a saw and his suggestions practical. One afternoon, as they lifted a beam into place, their shoulders brushed, and Eleanor felt a jolt not of fear, but of something warm and unfamiliar. "You've got a knack for this," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Folks are starting to see it. They see a woman who doesn't know her place." Eleanor replied, half joking, but her voice betrayed a thread of worry. Caleb's eyes softened. "They're lost if they can't see what I do." Her cheeks warmed, and she busied herself with her notebook, unsure how to navigate the quiet intensity of his gaze. Caleb was different from Thomas Reed's polished promises. He was raw real like the earth beneath her feet. But she wasn't here for romance, not after the sting of rejection. She was here to prove herself, trouble brewed by week's end. Clara, ever the shadow, approached Eleanor during a break, her smile as sharp as ever. "You're quite the spectacle, Miss Wade," she said, her voice loud enough to draw eyes. "But don't think this little project makes you one of us. Caleb's just being kind. He was mine long before you arrived." The words landed like a slap. Eleanor's hands tightened around her pencil. "I'm not here to take anything, Miss Beaumont," she said evenly. "I'm here to build." Clara's laugh was brittle. "We'll see how long that lasts." As Clara sauntered away, Doña Rufina appeared at Eleanor's side, her eyes blazing. "That one's got venom in her veins," she muttered. "But you, Nina, you've got iron. Don't let her shake you." Eleanor nodded, but Clara's words gnawed at her. Was Caleb's kindness just pity? And what history did he share with Clara? That night, as she sat by the boarding house fire, Rufina shared a story of her own, a love lost to war, a life rebuilt in Willow Creek. "You don't need a man to make you whole," Rufina said. "But if one sees you for who you are, don't push him away out of fear." The next day, a new challenge arose. Mr. Hargrove announced a shortage of lumber, threatening to halt the project. Eleanor's heart sank. Without the church, her fragile standing in Willow Creek would crumble. She proposed a bold solution, a community drive to source timber from nearby farms. Caleb backed her, immediately offering his own land's trees. "I trust you to make it work," he said, his voice steady as bedrock. As they walked the churchyard at dusk, the mountains glowing purple against the sky, Eleanor felt a shift. She wasn't just building a church, she was building trust, not just with the town, but with herself. But could she trust Caleb's intentions, or would Clara's shadow loom larger? And what would happen if the lumber drive failed? The morning air was sharp with the scent of sap and earth as Eleanor led a small group into the hills beyond Willow Creek. The lumber drive was her gamble, a chance to save the church project and prove her worth. Caleb walked beside her, his axe slung over his shoulder, his presence a quiet anchor. Behind them trailed Jonah, the blacksmith's apprentice, and a handful of farmers, their faces a mix of skepticism and curiosity. The Smoky Mountains loomed, their peaks dusted with early frost, a reminder of the fleeting time before winter would stall their work. Eleanor's plan was simple, but bold: harvest trees from Caleb's land and nearby farms, mill them into planks, and keep the church rebuild on track. She'd spent nights poring over her notebook, calculating needs and rallying volunteers. But the whispers followed her. Clara's sewing circle had spread word that Eleanor was overstepping, a stranger meddling in their town's affairs. "She'll fail," Clara had said at the general store loud enough for Eleanor to overhear, "and take Caleb down with her." Now as they reached Caleb's wooded acres, Eleanor pushed the doubts aside. The pines stood tall, their needles carpeting the ground, and the river nearby gurgled like a soft lullaby. "We'll mark the trees today," she said, her voice clear. "Caleb, you know this land best. Where do we start?" He pointed to a cluster of sturdy pines. "Those are strong, straight, good for beams." His tone was practical, but his glance lingered on her, warm and steady. "You've got this, Eleanor." Her heart lifted, but she focused on the task. As the group worked, marking trunks, planting cuts, she felt a flicker of pride. These were her people now, even if they didn't fully trust her. Jonah, eager to prove himself, swung his axe with gusto, while the farmers nodded approval at her efficiency. By midday, they'd marked enough trees to keep the sawmill busy for weeks. But trouble stirred when Clara appeared riding up on a sleek mare, her dress pristine despite the muddy trail. "Caleb," she called, ignoring Eleanor. "You're risking your land for her scheme." "What if it fails?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "It's not her scheme, Clara. It's ours. The church matters to everyone." Clara's eyes flashed, but she turned to the farmers. "You're trusting a woman who's been here less than a month. She's no leader, just a spinster with no place else to go." The words cut deep, and Eleanor felt the group's eyes on her. Her hands trembled, but she stepped forward. "I'm here because I believe in this town," she said, her voice firm. "Judge me by my work, not your whispers." A tense silence followed. Then Jonah spoke up, his voice cracking with youth. "Miss Wade's got us organized. I say we keep going." One by one, the farmers nodded, and Clara's smile faltered. She rode off without another word, but Eleanor knew this wasn't the end. As the group returned to work, Caleb lingered. "You handled that well," he said. "Clara, she's got history here. Don't let her get to you." Eleanor wanted to ask about that history, Clara's claim on him, the shadow of his past, but the moment passed. Instead, she focused on the trees, their bark rough under her fingers. Each one felt like a promise, not just for the church, but for her place in Willow Creek. That evening, as she sat with Doña Rufina, the older woman poured her a glass of cider. "You're stirring things up, Nina," Rufina said. "That's good. But watch your back, Clara's not done." Eleanor nodded, her mind racing. The lumber drive was a success so far, but Clara's influence was a storm cloud on the horizon. Could she keep the town's trust? And what was Caleb's past with Clara? Did it threaten the spark growing between them as the fire crackled? Eleanor felt the weight of her choices, but also a burgeoning strength. She was no longer just surviving, she was fighting for a home. The sawmill hummed with life as the first logs from Caleb's land were transformed into planks, their sharp, resinous scent filling the air. Eleanor stood at the edge of the operation, her notebook now smudged with dirt and sawdust, her heart swelling with cautious pride. The church project was back on track, and the townsfolk's skepticism was thawing. Mrs. Hargrove brought her a basket of apples as thanks, and Jonah now called her Miss Eleanor with a grin. But Clara's words lingered like a bruise. Just a spinster with no place else to go. Eleanor's days were long spent coordinating deliveries and checking the mill's progress, but the evenings offered a quiet reprieve. She often found herself walking with Caleb along the river that bordered his land, the water reflecting the fiery hues of autumn leaves. Their conversations were simple talk of timber weather, the town's quirks, but each word felt like a thread weaving them closer. One evening, as the sun dipped below the Smoky Mountains, casting a golden glow over the river, Caleb broke their usual rhythm. "You ever think about what brought you here?" he asked, tossing a pebble into the water. "Not just Willow Creek, but this moment." Eleanor hesitated, the weight of Thomas Reed's letter heavy in her memory. I thought I was coming for a marriage, she admitted, but maybe I was running towards something bigger, a chance to be more than what others expect. Caleb's eyes met hers, steady and searching. I know that feeling. After my wife passed, I thought I'd never find purpose again. But you're making me see things different. Her breath caught. His words were plain, but they carried a warmth that made her heart stutter. Before she could respond, a rustle in the trees interrupted them. Clara emerged, her expression a mix of surprise and calculation. Well, isn't this cozy, she said, her voice sharp. Caleb, you're needed at the mill. There's trouble. At the sawmill, they found chaos. A blade had jammed, halting production. The miller, a gruff man named Mr. Tate, pointed to a pile of ruined planks. Someone tampered with the gears, he growled. This'll set us back days. Eleanor's stomach sank. Sabotage. Her eyes flicked to Clara, who stood with a feigned look of concern. How terrible, Clara said. Perhaps this project is cursed, Miss Wade? The accusation hung unspoken, but Eleanor felt its sting. She spent the next hours working with Caleb and Mr. Tate to repair the damage, her hands steady despite her racing thoughts. Had Clara orchestrated this to discredit her, or was it mere coincidence? Later at the boarding house, Doña Rufina poured Eleanor a cup of chamomile tea. Trouble follows those who shake things up, she said. Clara's scared of you, Nina. You're showing this town what a woman can do. Eleanor sipped the tea, its warmth soothing her frayed nerves. I don't want to fight her, she said, but I won't let her stop me. Rufina's eyes twinkled. Good. And that Caleb, he sees you. Don't let Clara's shadow make you doubt that. The next day, Eleanor rallied the workers, proposing a night shift to recover lost time. To her surprise, the townsfolk agreed, their trust in her growing. Caleb stayed late, his presence a quiet reassurance. As they worked under lantern light, he shared a piece of his past. Clara had once been his fiancée before his wife, but her ambition had driven them apart. She wants control, he said. You want to build. That's the difference. His words lit a fire in Eleanor. She wasn't just fighting for the church, now she was fighting for her place, her purpose, and maybe for a man who saw her as she was. But as the mill roared back to life, she couldn't shake the feeling that Clara's next move was coming. Would it break her, or would it forge her resolve even stronger? The sawmill's rhythmic grind echoed through the frosty air, a testament to Eleanor's determination to recover from the sabotage. Lanterns cast golden pools of light across the yard, where workers moved with renewed purpose. Eleanor's hands were raw from hauling planks, her breath visible in the chill, but her spirit blazed. The church's frame was rising each beam, a defiance of Clara's schemes and the town's lingering doubts. The sabotage had shaken Willow Creek, but it also rallied the community. Mr. Hargrove donated extra oil for the lanterns, and Mrs. Hargrove organized a rotation of hot meals. Even Jonah, barely 16, stayed late, his youthful energy infectious. You're tougher than my pa's old mule, Miss Eleanor, he said with a grin, earning a tired laugh from her. Caleb was never far, his steady presence grounding her. During a break, as they shared a tin cup of coffee under a star-streaked sky, he spoke quietly. Folks are talking, Eleanor, not just about the church, but about you. They're starting to believe in you. Her heart warmed, but doubt lingered. And you, Caleb. What do you believe? He met her gaze, his eyes reflecting the lantern's glow. I believe you're the kind of woman who changes things, who changes people. The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken possibility. Eleanor wanted to lean into them to let herself hope, but Clara's shadow loomed. The woman hadn't been seen since the mill incident, but her absence felt more like a storm brewing than a retreat. The storm broke the next day. At the church site, Eleanor arrived to find a crowd gathered, their faces grim. Mr. Tate, the miller, held up a charred plank. Found this in the lumber pile, he said. Someone tried to set it alight last night. Could have burned the whole lot. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Clara stepped forward, her voice honeyed with concern. This project is cursed, I tell you. First the mill now. This Miss Wade, perhaps it's time to admit you're in over your head. Eleanor's pulse raced, but she held her ground. If someone's trying to stop us, they're not just attacking me, they're attacking Willow Creek. This church is ours. Are we going to let fear win? Her words struck a chord. Mrs. Hargrove nodded fiercely and Jonah pumped a fist. Even Mr. Tate, usually gruff, muttered, She's right. We keep going. Clara's smile tightened, but she didn't push further. As the crowd dispersed, Caleb pulled Eleanor aside. I found tracks near the lumber pile, he said quietly, leading to Clara's stable. I can't prove it was her, but Eleanor's jaw clenched. She's scared of what we're building. Not just the church, but the trust. Caleb's hand brushed hers, a fleeting touch that sent warmth through her. She can't break what you're making here. Not if we stand together. That night, Eleanor sat with Doña Rufina, the boarding house fire crackling as they shared cornbread. Clara's fighting for control, Rufina said. But you, Nina, you're fighting for something real. Love, purpose, a home. Don't let her steal that. Eleanor nodded, her mind turning to Caleb. His quiet strength, his belief in her, it was more than she dared hope for after Thomas Reed's rejection. But Clara's sabotage was a warning. The church was nearly complete, but the final push would test her resolve. Could she protect her vision and her heart from Clara's next move? Or would the flames of doubt consume everything she'd built? The church stood nearly finished, its whitewashed frame glowing under the soft light of an autumn morning. The air was heavy with the scent of drying leaves and fresh paint, the Smoky Mountains a silent witness to Willow Creek's transformation. Eleanor moved through the churchyard, her notebook worn from constant use, her heart buoyed by the progress. The townsfolk worked with a shared rhythm, nailing shingles, sanding pews, their chatter, mingling with the rustle of wind through the pines. She was no longer just the rejected stranger. She was becoming part of their story. But Clara Beaumont's shadow loomed larger than ever. Since the attempted fire at the lumber pile, Clara had shifted tactics, her outright hostility replaced by a subtler weapon gossip. Her sewing circle spread rumors like wildfire. Eleanor was too ambitious, too plain, too unfit to lead. She's chasing Caleb for his land, Clara had whispered at the general store, loud enough for Mrs. Hargrove to overhear. The words stung, but worse was the doubt they sowed in the town's fragile trust. Caleb remained Eleanor's anchor, his steady hands hauling beams, his quiet smiles warming her through the chill. During a break, as they shared a jug of cider under the church's half-built steeple, he spoke softly. You're changing this town, Eleanor. Don't let the whispers make you doubt it. She wanted to believe him, but the weight of Clara's campaign pressed hard. They're listening to her, she said, her voice low. What if they turn on me? He took her hand, his touch rough but gentle. They see you. I see you. That's enough. Her heart fluttered, but before she could respond, trouble struck. Mr. Hargrove approached, his face grim. Eleanor, we've got a problem. The town council's questioning your leadership. Clara's got them thinking you've overstepped, saying a woman shouldn't be running this project. The words hit like a blow. The council, led by older men like Mr. Tate, held sway over Willow Creek's decisions. If they pulled their support, the church project and Eleanor's place in the town would collapse. Her hands tightened around her notebook. I'll talk to them, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. That afternoon, she faced the council in the schoolhouse, a cramped room smelling of chalk and wood smoke. Clara sat in the back, her smile sharp as a blade. Miss Wade, Mr. Tate began, We appreciate your efforts, but some say you're stirring unrest. A woman leading, it's unconventional. Eleanor's pulse raced, but she stood tall. This church isn't about me, it's about Willow Creek. I've worked alongside you, organized lumber, rallied volunteers, accounted for every cent. Judge me by my actions, not Clara's whispers. Caleb, standing by the door, spoke up. She's done more for this town in weeks than most do in years. If you shut her out, you're shutting out progress. A tense silence followed. Then Mrs. Hargrove, who joined the meeting, stood. Eleanor's given us hope. Let her finish what she started. One by one, others nodded, Jonah's mother, the blacksmith, even Mr. Tate, though grudgingly. Clara's face tightened, but she said nothing, her influence waning. That night at Doña Rufina's, Eleanor sat by the fire, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. I won today, she told Rufina, but Clara's not done. And I'm scared I'll lose this town, or… Caleb. Rufina's eyes gleamed. You're fighting for more than a church, Nina. You're fighting for your heart. Don't let fear win. As Eleanor lay in bed, the council's approval felt like a victory, but Clara's silence was ominous. The church's dedication loomed, and with it the chance to solidify her place. But would Clara's next move shatter her dreams, or could Eleanor's courage and Caleb's steadfast support carry her through? The church was nearly complete, its steeple now crowned with the recovered bell, gleaming under the fading October light. The air carried the crisp bite of autumn and the sweet scent of drying hay from nearby fields. Eleanor stood in the churchyard, her hands rough from weeks of labor, her heart a tangle of pride and trepidation. The townsfolk worked with a shared purpose, hammering shingles, painting walls, their laughter mingling with the clanging of the bell as Jonah tested its chime. Willow Creek was coming together, and Eleanor felt the stirrings of belonging. But Clara's shadow lingered. Since the bell's recovery, she'd been quieter, her barbs replaced by a calculated watchfulness that unnerved Eleanor more than outright hostility. The town's trust in Eleanor had grown. Mrs. Hargrove now called her by her first name, and even Mr. Tate tipped his hat, but Clara's sewing circle still whispered, their eyes darting between Eleanor and Caleb. Caleb. His presence was a steady current in her days, his quiet strength anchoring her through every challenge. They'd taken to sharing suppers at Doña Rufina's, their conversations weaving from the practical lumber count's roofing plans to the personal. He'd told her of his wife's death, the loneliness that followed, and how the church project had rekindled his hope. "You've got a way of bringing people together," he'd said last night, his voice soft over a plate of cornbread, "including me." Eleanor's heart had raced, but fear held her back. Thomas Reed's rejection still stung, and Clara's claim on Caleb, however past, cast a shadow. Was she foolish to hope for more than friendship? The breaking point came at the church's dedication ceremony planned for the next Sunday. As Eleanor finalized preparations, Clara swept into the churchyard, her auburn curls catching the sunlight, a leather-bound ledger in her hands. "I've been reviewing the project's costs," she announced to the gathered workers, her voice clear and cutting. "Miss Wade's mismanagement has drained our funds. We're short for the pews and windows." The accusation hit like a thunderclap. Eleanor's notebook trembled in her hands as eyes turned to her. "That's not true," she said, stepping forward. "Every penny's accounted for, Mr. Hargrove can confirm." Mr. Hargrove nodded, but doubt flickered in some faces. Clara's lips curved. "Then why's the ledger short? Perhaps you're not as capable as you think." Eleanor's blood boiled, but before she could respond, Caleb's voice cut through. "Enough, Clara." He stood beside Eleanor, his presence a wall of resolve. "You've been trying to tear this down from the start. The ledger's fine, I checked it myself. If there's a shortage, maybe you should explain where the sewing circle's donations went." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Clara's face paled, her ledger slipping slightly. "How dare you," she hissed, but her confidence wavered. Eleanor seized the moment. "This church isn't about me or you, Clara. It's about Willow Creek. If there's a shortage, I'll work to fix it. But I won't let lies stop us." The crowd murmured approval, and Clara retreated, her eyes blazing with defeat. Later at Doña Rufina's, Eleanor learned the truth from Jonah. Clara had skimmed donations, hoping to discredit Eleanor. The boy had overheard her boasting to a friend. That evening, as Eleanor and Caleb walked the churchyard, the bell's soft chime echoing, he took her hand. "You didn't just save the church," he said, his voice low. "You showed this town what courage looks like, and you've shown me what I want." Her heart leapt. "And what's that, Caleb Holt?" "You," he said, simply, his eyes steady. "If you'll have me." Eleanor's breath caught the weight of her past falling away. She nodded, tears prickling. "I will." But as they stood under the steeple, Clara's defeat felt too easy. Would her final act of spite unravel everything? Or could Eleanor's newfound love and community withstand the storm? The morning of the church's dedication dawned clear, the Smoky Mountains glowing gold under a crisp November sky. The air carried the scent of pine and fresh paint, mingling with the warmth of baking bread from Mrs. Hargrove's kitchen. The church stood complete, its whitewashed walls gleaming, the steeple bell shining like a beacon. Eleanor stood in the yard, her hands clasped tightly, her heart full. This was more than a building, it was proof of what she'd overcome, of the community she'd helped forge. The townsfolk gathered, their faces bright with pride. Children darted through the crowd, clutching wildflowers, while men and women admired the pews, funded by a last-minute collection Eleanor had organized after Clara's deception was exposed. Clara herself was absent, her influence diminished since Caleb's confrontation. Whispers said she'd left for a cousin's in Knoxville, but Eleanor felt no triumph in her rival's retreat. Her fight had never been about Clara. It had been about proving her own worth. Caleb stood beside her, his hand brushing hers, as they watched Jonah ring the bell, its clear note echoing across the valley. "You did this," he murmured, his voice warm with admiration. "Not just the church, Eleanor. You gave this town something to believe in." She smiled, her chest tight with emotion. "We did it. Together." The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Mr. Hargrove read a psalm and Mrs. Hargrove led a hymn, her voice soaring. Doña Rufina, resplendent in a shawl embroidered with roses, squeezed Eleanor's arm. "You've planted roots here, Nina," she whispered. "Strong ones." After the service, the townsfolk lingered, sharing cider and stories. Eleanor felt their acceptance in small gestures, a nod from Mr. Tate, a shy thank you from Jonah's mother. She was no longer the rejected stranger, but a woman who'd earned her place. As dusk settled, painting the sky in hues of lavender and amber, Caleb led Eleanor to the riverbank, where they'd shared so many quiet moments. The water shimmered, reflecting the first stars. He turned to her, his face earnest, his hand steady as he took hers. "Eleanor Wade," he said, "I've spent years thinking I'd never find home again. But you're my home. Marry me and let's build a life here together." Her heart soared, the last shadows of Thomas Reed's rejection dissolving. She saw Caleb for all he was, a man who'd known loss, who'd chosen to see her strength, not her scars. "Yes," she whispered, tears spilling over. "Yes, Caleb." He pulled her close, his kiss gentle but sure, sealing a promise under the willow trees. The river sang softly and the bell's distant chime felt like a blessing. Months later, Eleanor and Caleb stood hand in hand at their wedding held in the church they'd rebuilt. The pews were filled with faces she now called friends, Doña Rufina, Jonah the Hargroves. Their vows were simple, rooted in respect and shared dreams. Together they started a schoolhouse fund, ensuring Willow Creek's children would have a place to learn a legacy of their love. As they stepped into their new life, Eleanor looked out at the town she'd come to love. Its rolling hills, its stubborn hearts, its enduring spirit. She'd arrived with a broken dream, but she'd built something stronger. A home, a love, and a community that saw her for who she was. You followed Eleanor's journey to its end. Leave a comment with the word roots and share which moment touched you most. Like, share, and subscribe to join us for more stories of resilience and love. Check out related videos in the description. If you love this tale of courage and romance, explore more on our channel and share the inspiration